Daria came to visit me, she exclaimed as Yuri was taking her blood pressure. That's wonderful, Yuri said while measuring her pulse. Who is Daria? Some relative of yours from out of town? No, she was a dear friend of mine from a long time ago. She died when she was barely 20 and is buried in the cemetery just beyond that field. Welcome to The Night Visitors, where we share purportedly true accounts of interactions with vampires and other supernatural predators. I'm James, a paranormal researcher and lifelong vampire enthusiast, coming to you from Transylvania. The following is a true story with names and identifying details changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Tonight's account features a young doctor named Yuri from the former Soviet Union, who was stationed in a small, poorly equipped rural clinic in the mid-1980s. A recent graduate from the medical school in Minsk, Yuri was sent to a remote location in central Belarus to further his training and complete his residency. But in reality, he received no guidance or supervision and was the only doctor working the night shift. Not that his job was very difficult, as the only patients were local country folk with an occasional farming injury or elderly people with no family members close by that came to the clinic to spend their final days when caring for themselves was no longer possible. They liked Yuri because he was kind, kept them company, and didn't demand bribes for better care as was common in Soviet hospitals. Towards the end of his first month on the job, an elderly woman named Katerina, who was in the final stages of her life, was admitted to the clinic, and Yuri did his best to keep her comfortable and entertained. She was the only patient at the time, so he would spend long hours by her bedside chatting about her youth in Tsarist Russia. Yuri found Katya, as he affectionately called her, truly fascinating. She had been born in 1898 and was 19 when the Bolshevik Revolution broke out. Ekaterina's stories about growing up in abject poverty under Tsar Nicholas and the ultimate failure of a system that had promised liberation and equality captivated Yuri and made the long hours at the clinic more bearable. He loved how she spoke with the frankness of somebody who was leaving this earth and had nothing to lose. One night, Yuri arrived at the clinic for his overnight shift just before 10 p.m. He found Katya to be in particularly high spirits. Daria came to visit me, she exclaimed as Yuri was taking her blood pressure. That's wonderful, Yuri said while measuring her pulse. Who is Daria? Some relative of yours from out of town? No, she was a dear friend of mine from a long time ago. She died when she was barely 20 and is buried in the cemetery just beyond that field. Katya motioned towards the window in the direction of a small graveyard located next to a church that had fallen into disuse. Yuri nodded. He knew that people often saw deceased loved ones when they were about to pass. But he was not superstitious, and he knew that this was just a hallucination caused by a brain that was no longer fully functional. And it only happened because it was what the moribund person truly wanted to see in his or her last moments. She came right after sunset, Katya continued. And she says she will be back before dawn to bring me the venchik from the church so that I can rest in peace. The venchik is a cloth or paper headband, often featuring a prayer and holy icons that is fixed to the head of the deceased when they are laid to rest to help them on their way to the afterlife. I didn't know you were a believer, Yuri smiled. Oh yes, I never forgot the old ways, even when we weren't supposed to talk about them. I'm ready to see my husband again and my son that I lost in the Great Patriotic War. I've prayed for Daria's soul, but I don't think it helped much. That's why she still walks the night, Katya sighed. Maybe you should rest. Yuri was nervous, afraid of somebody overhearing their conversation. But then he remembered that they were the only two people there until morning. I can rest when I'm dead, she chuckled. Which should be soon. Indulge an old woman. Let me tell you about Daria. All right. Yuri made himself comfortable in a chair next to the bed. She was a kind girl, but lonely. Her mother died when she was very young, and her father married her off to a much older man who was an officer in the Imperial Army. She moved to Minsk and lived in a palace, but was treated like a piece of art or furniture, something lovely to look at, but of no other value. She took a lover, a young soldier her own age, and was happy for a short time, until her beast of a husband found out and shipped the young man to a remote outpost in Siberia. And soon after, Daria died under mysterious circumstances. They said she died by her own hand, but I never believed it. I am sure, though, she died with hate in her heart for all the wicked men that had made her life so lonely and miserable. She was returned to the village for a quick and shameful burial without prayers or proper funeral rites. Soon after, people began to whisper that she was cursed to roam the countryside, never to find peace. But not long after this, the Great War broke out, followed by Lenin's revolution, and people had bigger things to worry about than the unhappy dead walking about the countryside. And now Daria lies forgotten in that cold grave. Katya made the sign of the cross. That's a very sad story. So many peoples are victims of circumstance and have little control over their destinies. Yuri didn't know if he was talking about Daria or himself. Yes, she was truly a gentle and sweet soul, full of kindness. I never forgot her and have prayed for her when I could. It was nice to see her again, and I hope she comes before dawn as promised. Yuri smiled and nodded, and Katya dozed off. If believing she would see Daria gave her comfort in her final hours, he was not going to take that away from her. What he could never have imagined was that he himself would see her later that evening. It was a rainy March night with the earliest signs of spring already beginning to creep in as the snow melted and the earth softened. Yuri stood outside the clinic at 3 o'clock in the morning, watching the falling rain muddying the field that stretched out before him. He dreaded this time of year, as it felt as if nature was mocking him by coming back to life when he felt frozen, stagnant, and without options. His job was quiet at the moment and required little of him, but the fear lived strongly in him that this was all that awaited him in life. A tedious, repetitious routine in this forgotten, out-of-the-way clinic. His excellent ranking in medical school mattered little without party connections, and he had watched while classmates who had scored far lower than him got posts in the top hospitals in big cities across the Soviet Union. As he stood there contemplating his life, he heard talking coming from inside the clinic. It was long past visiting hours, and there was only one entrance through which he had not seen a single person enter, not to mention the fact that he and Katya were the only people there at the moment. Yuri walked past the window to Ekaterina's room and saw that she was not alone. A young woman with red hair and chalk-white skin was leaning over her bedside, fixing the venchik to her forehead. The girl could not have been older than 20, and she was dressed as if attending a ball in another century. She wore a short black sequin dress with her hair in an extravagant updo, complete with a black ostrich feather stuck into it. Yuri rushed to Katya's bedside and found her alone in the room, dead,
Лет 17
with a serene look on her face, and with the Venchik, with its glorious icons and prayer for mercy, firmly fixed to her forehead. The young woman had vanished in the few seconds it had taken him to arrive. Yuri moved Katya to the basement and did something he hadn't done in years, said a prayer, as much for his own comfort as for Katya's soul. He thought for a moment about removing the Venchik, but decided to leave it, feeling that a power greater than himself had left it there. After clearing Katya's room, Yuri stood again outside the clinic in complete and eerie silence. At one point, he closed his eyes for a brief second, for what was no more than an exaggerated blink, and opened them to find the same young woman that had been in Katya's room earlier that night standing in front of him. Do you really think that you're the first young doctor to stand here questioning his life and fearful of his future? She asked in Belarusian, smiling. Who are you? Yuri asked in Russian. Didn't Katyusha tell you? I'm Daria, she laughed. You will be all right, and your life doesn't end here, unlike others who can never leave this place. How can you be sure? I just know. Trust me, the dead don't lie. She turned and walked in the direction of the cemetery. As she walked away, Yuri noticed that she appeared to move unnaturally fast, almost vanishing and reappearing intermittently until she finally moved through the iron gates of the cemetery. Several weeks later, on a summer afternoon, Yuri decided to walk through the cemetery on his way to the clinic and stopped dead in his tracks when he came across an old neglected gravestone overgrown with weeds. On the stone slab was engraved the name Daria Adrianovna Petrova, with a date of death of April 23, 1914, along with a glass-encased photo of the same young woman he had spoken to outside the clinic shortly before dawn that early spring day. In spite of his secular communist upbringing and his education grounded in science and logic, from that day forward, Yuri believed in the supernatural and in the afterlife, and he knew that he had come into contact, albeit for a brief moment, with somebody who had come back from the grave. A few months later, Yuri was transferred to a hospital in Minsk and later moved to St. Petersburg before the collapse of the Soviet Union, where he still lives to this day. Under the new capitalist system, he started his own private clinic and had a successful decades-long career practicing medicine. His sister, who lives in the Brighton Beach area of Brooklyn, New York, told me the story of his encounter with the night visitor Daria. Was Daria a vampire or a ghost? Possibly both. Based on this account, she seems to be a kind and caring person, yet had never found rest and still roamed the Belarusian countryside as of the mid-1980s. It is a common theme in legends from that part of the world that those who die a tragic or unholy death often become vampires. I hope Daria has found peace in the decades that have passed since that incident occurred, and I hope you have enjoyed tonight's episode. A special thanks to composer Tim Kulig for our intro music, Haunted House. If you happen to be listening on YouTube, please subscribe and give us a like, and if you have any vampire encounters to share, contact me at thenightvisitorsvrs@gmail.com.
рана, як задужа жиба, я не віте, марок свой порос припадення.